About certain names and history, and this is not world history, and had to do with and important persons and that changed the world, like and maybe politicians and presidents and generals and conquerors and all that. Uh, how important, for example, is the history of your church? A couple of weeks ago, we have a record of about 50 people that attended a 50th anniversary of our church that no longer exists. And is that important to God, to us? And uh, I think that sometimes, and we need to know that God can speak to us through small things as well as big things. And there's always something to learn, I think. And maybe sometimes we find it difficult to make a direct line of connection. How does this apply to us? Okay. And I'll try to and my best and to make it as relevant as possible, but sometimes you just can't simply make something out of nothing. And so you have to pay attention to the text and allow the text to speak to us, and maybe we can get some insights this evening. Okay. Tonight I have titled and my session as uh, Ezra story. Okay. Okay. Now last week and we talked about Ezra and a bit about these things. Ezra and came out with the king. King granted everything. He left Jerusalem and he arrived in Jerusalem. He devoted himself to the study of the law. And then we have and the reading and a copy of the letter that the king gave to Ezra and all that. Now, instead of what we call continue the story, we are going to basically recap a little bit more and into a bit more detail of what happened in chapter 7. And this is the account of Ezra. And you find that this is, we can say, his journal, his memoirs, because you find that uh, we have what we call in the book of Ezra and Nehemiah two memoirs, and one then it is Ezra and in the first person, and the other one in Nehemiah also in the first person when we come to Nehemiah. We find that and in chapter 8, these are the family heads and those were just who came up with me from Babylon during the reign of King Artaxerxes. So this is a relating of Ezra's story. The interesting about this story and this account is Ezra uh, doesn't really say much about the journey itself. And in verse 31, he says, we set out from the Ahava Canal to go to Jerusalem. The hand of God was on us. He protected us from our enemies. And we arrived in Jerusalem where we rested 3 days. So basically, 2 verses and of the journey. Then on the 4th day, we weigh out the gold and all that. So the whole chapter doesn't really talk about the journey and from Babylon to Judea to Jerusalem. Unlike the Exodus account, and we have the journey of the Israelites, and we're going to all the things that happened, but there's really nothing that Ezra talked about. Okay, rather there are certain other things that he was concerned about, and we can find that he gave, first of all, like Ezra chapter 2, he gave a list of the people that came up with him. And if you compare chapter 8 and chapter 2, you would probably find some similarities and differences. One of the big difference is in chapter 2, the total number of people that came back numbered about 50,000. Uh, Sizable group, but compared to probably about 2-3 million people in living of the Jews that were living in Jerusalem, estimated about 2-3 thousand or 2 to 3 million people. Uh, 50,000 is not a very big number, okay? And the prophets and the word and prophesying there'll be a great return. So it kind of an anticlimactic situation, but still 50,000 is nothing to sneeze at. But we come to chapter 8 when Ezra led the people back. The number of people was about 1,500 men. If you conclude the children and the wives and maybe a little bit more, about maybe 3,000 or 4,000 people. So a significantly less group of people that came with Ezra. Well, what do we make of it? Well, one commentator, I said, this is 50 years later, and after the Cyrus gave the proclamation they can return, there was probably some great excitement about returning back. But during those 50 years and in between, there are probably letters that were sent to and fro about conditions there, conditions that, and it's very likely that the kind of initial enthusiasm and that accompanied the first return maybe have kind of cooled down quite a bit. And so instead of 50,000 or 100,000 more people coming back, you have quite a small number, about 1,500 men that came with their wives and their family. And as one devotional commentator says that it's sometimes like our church as well. In the beginning, then we start a church, there are a lot of excitement, there are a lot of things. Then as we go on, we kind of cool down, and things kind of, well, that might be so. But that is a kind of interesting note to know. But still, okay, and it is an important group of people that came back with Ezra. The second thing about this return is how Ezra listed the people. You find that in verse 2, and if you compare with Ezra 2, Ezra start with then the lay people. Okay, Ezra 2, he begins with the list of the leaders of the people, the lay people, and then the various people then has a priest, then the Levites later on, then the others and the people who cannot be accounted for. And so that is and how Zerubbabel then have the list. But in this list and of Ezra, you find that there is a difference. The first group of people that were listed were the priests, the descendants of Phinehas, that is Gershom, the descendants of Atama, that is Daniel. And unlike later on, they were not listed, and their families are not listed. The number of priests that came with them are not listed. There are basically two leaders of priests that were listed without any numbers. It is unlikely that they were alone, and because then later on, and you find that in verse 24, I set apart 12 of the leading priests. Okay, in verse 24. So kind of interesting because it set up the priest first, and in that. And then there is this line, the descendants of David, Hattush, of the descendants of Shekinah. Hattush is probably the great grandson and of Zerubbabel. Okay, let's see then. Going back to, all right. In Zechariah, in what we call in First Chronicles, you have the sons of Zerubbabel. Then these are the sons. Then the descendants of Hananiah. These are the sons of him. And then the Shechaniah is the sons of Hananiah. And then the descendants of Hananiah, Hattush. Okay, so this is the Hattush, who was the descendant of Shechaniah. So he is Zerubbabel's great grandson. And we probably don't know how many generations, but because sometimes this is 50 years after Zerubbabel then came back. And so just a little word, Hattush, descendants of Shechaniah. All right. And so there were so far what we call the priestly family, the royal family, the royal descendant. But not much is made out of it. But they are set apart in one sense. There were no numbers listed among them. So definitely they didn't come alone. And they probably have some people that accompanied them. Then we have the descent of Parosh, Pahat Moab, Zatu, Adin, Elam, Shephatiah, Joab, Bani, Bebai. If you were not like Kamwa, who skip over the names, and you will pay attention to the names, you find that many of these names also found in chapter 2. And they are basically, in fact, all the names here are found in chapter 2. And some of the names are not there, but it is in certain lists in First Ezra. And for example, Bani is not found in Ezra chapter 2, but it's found in Ezra and in the related. So somehow that name was missed out. So the son of Bani. Okay. And so you find that these are the third, fourth generation of the first group of pilgrims that came back. And so the first group came back, they were the pioneers and all that, and then their relatives returned as well. And so you can imagine, and when they came to Jerusalem, there was probably what we call a kind of reunion with long lost brothers and sisters and uncles and all that. And it is like, you go back to China, and Lawrence and Philip and went back and found what we call the ancestral home, so to speak, and a kind of interesting kind of a thing. Another thing is to note that the list from verse 3 or 4 all the way down to verse 14, there are 12 family heads. Probably quite an artificial listing. Maybe this is not the complete list, but 12 families were listed, and perhaps it is not too far-fetched to claim that the idea of 12 families represented 12 tribes. Now they do not belong to the 12. The family heads is not one is and this tribe and there is no such what we call one-to-one relation, but the idea of 12. Okay, and we find that later on you'll find that there were 12 leading priests. And then when they came back to the end of Jerusalem, they sacrificed 12 bulls for all Israel. So the symbolic number of 12 is kind of important and significant. So these are what we call the representatives of the people that came back. And they are not the first group of people that came back. They are maybe not even the second group that came back. And I would suspect in between, they are from time to time, different groups come back. But the fact that this came back with Ezra make this significant because Ezra is seen as the great reformer of the Jewish life. So these are the people that was led by Ezra. Ezra sometimes is seen by the Jewish people as the second Moses. Moses is the one who brought the law, and Ezra, after Babylon, after the exile, came and taught the law. So he is like the second Moses that brought the people back. And you also notice that the list of people, 150, 200, 300, 550, 70, kind of round numbers, and except for verse 9, 218, 228, and kind of suspicious. And probably this is not exact numbers. It kind of round up and things like that, and make it. And why they do that? Maybe I'm not sure I know all the reasons for it, but it's kind of rounding up. And as opposed to chapter 2, when that number probably included men and women and children, and basically, you look at chapter 2, they are just, and let's see, chapter 2, the descendants of Parosh, 2,172, Shephatiah, 372, Ara, and 775, Pahat Moab, 2,000, and Trelawney of Joab. So these are the descendants, and the number is generic numbering. And but here, specifically, these are men. Now, in Hebrew, there are different words for man. One is Ish and or Adam, even Adam, and that is human beings in general, people. Okay, could be generic. And there was one time in English that man is inclusive. Inclusive basically means people. But this word men here, and in Hebrew, is called zakah. And zakah is specifically men, male. Okay. So in the toilets, zakah and woman, and it basically it is men and women. So these are men, and only the men were registered. So many men, 200 men, all men, 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 men. Very chauvinistic, I think. And I don't know why, again, Ezra and listed only the men. Okay. Maybe then later on is a prelude and to chapter 9, and when they had a problem with the men and who married and other than foreign wives in Judea, in what we call. So, and it's very male focused and things like that. All right. So some of you ladies might, the Bible, why only this time the men, don't include the women? Okay. Well, that is history law, what to do. Okay. And then this last one. Okay. And in Ezra, then we have the Adonicam, and then you have Adonicam. Here's one of the last ones. Who are these last ones? And nobody can be absolutely sure what these last ones mean. Probably the most likely is that this may be a reference to these are the last ones of the family of Adonicam to leave Babylon, and the entire family descendants have left. Babylon. They have returned back, and they were the last ones and to leave Babylon. The rest, they still have relatives in Babylon. There are some people who never come back, things like that. So maybe another come, the whole family, and eventually, and the first group came, and now these were the last ones, and who returned. That is a possibility. That is a speculation. Can't be 100% sure. Um, um, I do not know anybody who have a better possibility answer. All right. So you have this list of people: the priest, the royal family, Hattush, and then 12 leading family members listed with their family, men, their names were listed, and they were the leaders, the descendants. And then after that, is Ezra relate what actually happened. Assemble all of them at the canal that flows to Ahava, and we camped there for 3 days. Why 3 days? And there's always this 3 days also as well, and kind of make it preparations. And so basically, I think we understand, when you're a big group of people that have to travel, you need to check in, you need to what we call account for everybody, you name, you register everybody, things like that, and you make sure and nobody got lost along the way and things like that. So 3 days they camped there. When I checked among the people and the priests, I found no Levites there. Wow. This whole group of people did not have any Levites. In Ezra chapter 2, there were some Levites that came. Probably the Levites were a very small group. Now, there are absolutely no Levites that come. And I think the reason is not too difficult to assess. And Levites are somehow in between. The priests will have what we call prominence in the Jewish community because they are priests and all that. The Levites are the assistants to the priests. They do the various necessary work and not directly in the priesthood. And for them, and Levites also have no claim to have what we call land. They cannot own land, they cannot do property, and they're just assistants. And if you look today, people like to be pastors and ministers. They don't like to be pastoral staff, and they're not called to that kind of a thing. And nobody really wants that. And or maybe I'm exaggerating that. And but the people and the Levites who were in and uh, basically uh, in Babylon, and they are no longer considered Levites. There is no temple, there are no rituals, and so they have to live like anybody else, and they are like lay people, and probably many of them have come to life, and to give up that kind of a life and take on the Levitical role back in Jerusalem is perhaps not very attractive, when they are second class and people and even third class. The lay people can do their business and have the farming and things like that. The priests will have it involved in the temple, and they are just the helpers, the servants, and they are not wanting to come back. There was what we call an interesting rabbinic legend, a story, and it says that it was not there was no Levites, but there were Levites there that came and that somehow cut off their fingers and or disfigure themselves. So in that sense, they are not properly Levites because are not suitable. So there are no suitable Levites, and so then if you are deformed or and somehow then not completely whole, you are disqualified. So there are no Levites. Okay. And so what did Ezra do? Ezra summoned Eleazar, Ariel, Shemaiah, Elnathan, Jarub, Elnathan, Nathan, Zechariah, Meshul, who were the leaders. Okay. I think there were probably about 9 of them. They were the leaders. And then there were Joarib and Elnathan, who were men of learning. Okay. They were the scholars. They were the scribes. Okay. I ordered them to go to Edo, who was a leader in a region called Capisia. I told them what to say to Edo and his fellow Levites, the temple servants that in Cappadocia, that they might bring attendance to us for our house of God. So there were a big delegation that went to the what we call to Edo, who probably was a Levite and a leader of the Levites, his fellow Levites, temples, and in that community. And they might bring attendance for us to convince them. So 10 prominent leaders, 9 prominent leaders, and or 10 prominent leaders, or 9 prominent leaders, and then 2 men of learning, scholarly people, and try to convince them. Verse 18, because the gracious hand of our God was on us. And here, and Ezra attributed not to their skill, not to, even though definitely the peaceman was chosen carefully by Ezra, but the success, so-called, it was not a great success. It was a modest success, but then still the success he attributes God because of the gracious hand of God. They brought us Sherebiah, a capable man, what we call a very, very what we call noted person, and of the Levites, descendant from the Mali, the son of Levi, the son of Israel, and Sherebiah's sons and brothers, 18 of them. So 18 from that family. And then Hashabiah, together with Shisha, and from the sons of Mari and his brothers and nephews, 20 in all. Okay, so probably there are about 3 families of Levites that finally returned. Altogether, 38. Not a very big number of people. Why was so important for the Levites? Because part of the Levites' situation has to do with, and they are the ones who carry the temple vessels. And basically, they are the ones and who will then handle the vessels while the priests do the sacrificial thing. And he needed them. They also brought us 222 temple servants, a body that David officially established to assist the Levites. So they were the assistants to the Levites, and all of these registered by name. So he was very careful, and there were the priests, there was a Davidic family, there were the 12 representative families, no Levites. So they have to stop to find Levites. They found that they needed Levites. Well, in the church, I think that this is a lesson. There is a place for everybody, and there's a necessity for people who do ministry in any local church. They must be the pastors, the deacons, the elders, the worship leaders, the ushers, and people who maybe cook and things like that. Everybody is important. And so that is something that we may learn from here, the importance to have the whole company to come. You need people that will fulfill every particular function. And then verse 21, another important thing. And Ezra is not a person who then, again, he's a scholar, he's a scribe, and he knows the law, and he is very conscientious. So he proclaimed a fast that we might humble ourselves before God and ask for a safe journey for us and for our children and for all our possessions. Fasting and in Israel and used to be what we call and probably before this time, and associated with what we call time of mourning and repentance. But here was a fast that we might humble ourselves before God and ask God for a safe journey. Probably this is something that Ezra did, and a sense of recognizing by prayer and fasting. And it is a prayer, and they became a fast that they will fast themselves before God and to ask God to pray for a safe journey for our children and with all our possessions. So this journey began with fasting, and so it's good to learn that prayer and fasting should precede every great important ministry and a work of God. Verse 22. I was ashamed to ask the king for soldiers and horsemen to protect us from enemies, because we told the king, the gracious hand of God is on everyone who looks to him, but his great anger against all who forsake. So we fasted and petitioned about God, to God about God for about this, and he answered our prayer. Now, the journey from Babylon and to Jerusalem is about 800, 900 miles, and short about 1,000 miles. And if you talk about kilometers, it's more than 1,000 kilometers. And they are taking a lot of gold and silver with them. And probably it was not something that is done secretly, and is not no, and privately. Everybody knows, and the danger of they being accosted by bandits and being robbed upon the way, and is not to be discounted. And normally, when you have that kind and of a procession, or what we call a caravan to go, you will have soldiers and armed guards and horsemen to protect. Maybe Ezra then initially then when he was taken to the king, and he was so uh, boastful or so then confident to tell God will protect us. So, and then when he find that there's so, and he recognized what we call the real, very real danger and of being robbed along the way. But he was too ashamed to ask the king. Okay. Later on, you find that Nehemiah did ask the king for an what we call armed escort. And now this is not to say that Ezra is less what we call and faith has less faith than Nehemiah, and Nehemiah Ezra has more faith than Nehemiah. Nehemiah has less faith in God. But I think that the relations between faith and taking practical means and is something that I think is has to be left to the individual person, and we should not judge and too much upon one way or another. This is the second time he says the gracious hand of God is upon us, is upon everyone. So he proclaimed a fast, he petitioned God, and he said God answered our prayer. So he set up apart 12 leading priests of the leading priests. He weighed out of them the silver and the gold and the articles and the advisors, and that the king advisors and officials and all Israel. So there were groups of people that the government and the king advisors, officials, and the people of Israel donated for the house of God. And he weighed out to them about 650,000 talents. That's about 24 tons of silver, and 3 tons of silver articles, 100 and talents, about 3 tons of gold, and so about 8.4 kilograms of bowls of gold. And these are the things that the king then gave then to then maybe there were some of the articles that were left behind, not, and they were not found, and but it could also be a contribution by the king and the other people. And Ezra committed it to the priest and the Levites. And of course, the Levites were to assist the priest. And so you as well as this article are consecrated to and the Lord. The silver and gold are freewill offering to the Lord, the God of your ancestors. Guard them carefully until you weigh them out in the chambers of the house of the Lord before the leading priests and Levites and the family heads. So the Levites, the priests and the Levites received the gold. So it's not just the priests, it was the Levites. Of course, the priests are the head, the Levites are the assistant, received the gold, and the security has been weighed out to be taken out to the house of God. So again, there is a proper, we call, and distribute carrying, and the people who will be responsible for the gold, for the silver, for all the precious articles, sacred articles, were handed over to not one, but to basically the 12, again, 12 leading priests, and Sherebiah, Hashabiah, and 10 of their brothers. Okay. All right. So they came. So on the 12th day of the first month, now in Ezra chapter 7, it was said that after these things, and they began his journey from Babylon on the first day of the month, and that is basically they started to prepare the journey on the first day, but there was a 12 days delay of getting the Levites together, and finally, when everything is done, they left on the 12th day, and so on the 12th day, we set out from the Ahava Canal and to go to Jerusalem. And now the third time, the hand of our God is on us. He protected us from enemies and bandits along the way. No details given, just an interesting summary. God protected us. How? He never really, maybe there might be some close calls or whatever it is, but to him, it was not the important thing. The important thing is that God protected them. Okay. So we arrived in Jerusalem and on the 5th month, and according to then chapter 7, and we rested 3 days. They started 3 days fasting. They rested 3 days. On the 4th day, in the house of God, we out the silver, the gold, sacred into the hands of Meremoth, son of Uriah the priest, probably the high priest. Eleazar, son of Phinehas, was with them, so the Levites, and Jezabad, son of Joshua, not there. Everything was accounted for by number and weight, and the entire weight was recorded at that time. So this is proper accounting. I think then one of the problems, I think then sometimes people say, oh, church spend a lot of time and church meetings and have, I've been with what we call annual church meetings, and a lot of time is spent on the finance. And sometimes, yeah, it's probably and can be a negative thing, but to see everything done properly, and everything is accounted for. No there were some bags and things like that. No, 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 no. Everything has been accounted properly. Everything is accounted for by number. Everything accounted for by weight, and the entire weight was recorded at that time. And so church, financial integrity, financial accountability, because these are sacred things. These are articles that belong to God, and there should be proper accounting for it. Okay. And then the exiles returned from captivity, burned sacrifices to God for Israel, 12 bulls for all Israel, 69 rams, 77 male lambs, and a sin offering, 12 male goats. This was a burnt offering to the Lord. The first thing to do is worship God. sacrifice. This is the first things item. Then they delivered the king's orders to the royal satraps and the governors of the transferface, who then give assistance to the people and the house of God. And remember, see, and Ezra, he got what we called you are to, with the wisdom of God, appoint magistrates, judges, administer justice. All people, all who know the laws of God, you are to teach anyone who do not know them. Whoever doesn't belong to obey the law of the Lord, of God, and it were punishable. So these are the orders from the king, from the emperor. Okay, and so the royal and the king's orders were given to the royal satraps and the governors of the Trans-Euphrates province, and they gave assistance to the people and to the house of God. That's Ezra chapter 8. Okay. All right. Okay. So in this story, and Ezra's and a story, then I call it a story because he's relating, or his memoirs, and the story of, you find that we probably, then today we might like to know more about the journey itself, what happened, and close calls, and if any bandits come and God's come and strike them down or things like that. Ezra never said anything about that. The important thing that he had was that, and he had a proper listing of the people, the priests, the royal house, and that is there, but it seems to be what we call not so important, and somehow it was kind of a low key kind of a thing, but it was there. And then the 12 families representative, then they found that there were no Levites. Then they basically have to get Levites to come, and he doesn't say how he persuaded them, but he was able to find 3 families, at least about 38 of them, to come, and then with their other servants, and who may not have, and if they are slaves and they are endangered servants, they probably have to come, and when the Levites bring them along, and so then they fasted, they prayed, they distributed the money. They committed the money to the gold and silver to the priests who will carry them and who will be responsible for them. And they traveled back to Jerusalem. Okay, so kind of very orderly, very what we call systematically, and a detail we call work that Ezra did it doing, and perhaps in that gives us something that even in